just wanted to say welcome and thank you to everyone who is here today to share in talking about Black burnout and what that means. We've all experienced it and or know someone who has, because some people, have not experienced it. But I just wanted to say a formal welcome and we're glad you're here. I mean, we work really great as a group to try to provide content and material that is really relevant to the Black nonprofit leaders that are here in South Carolina. We also want to just share a little bit about Together SC, and that's one of the catalysts of why we're here. Years ago at the last summit that was held pre-COVID, we kind of got together as a round table and realized that we really needed support and we really wanted to work together and try to achieve some things to really support others in this work. And that birthed the Black Nonprofit Leaders Group and the committee of wonderful folks that have, and along with the guidance of Jessica and Rodney, to put this together for you. So we're really excited to have you. And we just want to tell you that this is more is coming. Together SC has made a commitment. I serve as the chair of Black Nonprofit Leaders Group, and I also serve on the board. And I'm here to share with you that Together SC is committed to this work. They're committed to be an ally and support us and provide a platform for us to talk, share, commit, have a resource, tools, and make it a better way for us to work and do it together and to support the Black nonprofit leaders. So I just wanted to welcome everyone, tell everyone why we're here, and that if you're a member Together SC, thank you. And if you're not, please join, because, we're going to be rolling out information. We know that in the next couple of months, we are hopeful and that we will be in person. We've transitioned to be able to do this virtually, and logistically it's worked out for us, and we've had attendance and people have supported it. But there's a lot of pieces of the networking and the getting to know and understanding each other that we miss when we are virtual. So it's helpful to sit in my office and do this, but I think sometimes there's parts of it not be able to hug and love on and share and ask questions and communicate the way we like to do. So I'd just like to take a second. Are we ready to introduce Meredith? Let me pull that up real fast. Yes. All right.
And while Nicole's pulling that up, I just want to quickly note that I have put the Together SC website link in the chat. It's just togethersc.org, so that you can, if you're not a member, your organization isn't, you can learn more about membership and all of the things Together SC are going to be found on that website.
Yes, thank you very much, Jessica. So we're going to talk about Meredith. I mean, she's a dynamic and wonderful individual, and just reading her bio, she's been in this game for 20 years, and she's worked as a health educator, and she has done grants and a trainer, and she's knows this work. She knows what philanthropy is, and she's a champion. She helps our vulnerable populations and our citizens, and she does her best to make sure that where we live and reside is a better place because of it. So she attended Bennett College and Mercer University School of Medicine, and is currently the board of directors of Girls Rock Columbia. Yes. And she is also a member of Women in Philanthropy, and she does a host of other nonprofit work and provides support to other nonprofits in the community. Am I still there? Oh, I'm still there. So I would just like to show some love and welcome and open up our hearts and our ears to listen. We get out of whatever we are part of by being open and honest and truthful and listening. So please, like I tell my children, mouths closed, ears open, and hearts open to receive. Thank you, guys.
So first of all, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm going to give a little disclaimer before I get started. So the experience I'm going to share is my own, and the views are my own, and I'm not here representing any agency or organization. I'm here to talk specifically about my experience with burnout. Burnout specifically is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been managed successfully. And it is characterized by 3 dimensions. The 2 that I experienced was an increase in mental distance from my work and a reduced professional efficacy. Just so you all know, the World Health Organization is trying to figure out some evidence-based guidelines on mental health well-being in the workplace. But if you are experiencing specifically depression, I encourage you all to seek support from a professional. So I just wanted to put that disclaimer out that I'm specifically talking about. I'm kind of nervous, so bear with me. My experience with burnout in the workplace. And so just to tell you a little bit who I am, I'm from Chester, South Carolina. I always like to tell people where I'm from. I am the only child of two elderly and aging parents. So I like to put that out there. I'm also a Black woman who works in reproductive health, but I also struggle with the fact that right now in America, adolescent pregnancy prevention is not a priority about what is happening in the Black community in this nation. And so, but I have to go to work and work with that and sit around tables and have these discussions. But I also sit before you as someone who took the month of May off. Our employee handbooks, just like you all's, probably say that a birth, a death, or an illness are only things that allow you to take some time off. And the reality is none of those didn't work for me. And I, had a very clear conversation with my supervisor, and I said to them, I'm a very good trainer. I'm a very good grant manager. And if you want my best, I am going to have to step back. And that was a very bold conversation to have because, that's traditionally people just say, well, take PTO, take a long weekend. That's not our responsibility. But I had a very honest conversation with myself that I knew what I brought to the table for my organization. I knew what I could bring to the table. I needed a break. I've been working for 20 years. I've been at this organization for 10, and the world is changing. Reproductive health is changing. This content is changing. I'm changing. I turned 40 in August. And I needed to step back and do some evaluation. And luckily, she heard that. Sometimes people see our value in the workplace before we do. And I knew at that moment when she said, what do you need? That she saw my value and that I needed to. So I'm going to share with you all just some of the things that I learned during the month of May. The reality is life did not stop. A lot of things happened in the world. A lot of things happened in my life. But some of the things that I learned and acknowledged that I needed to, some of the things I needed to acknowledge was there's this thing called transmitted traumatic stress that talks about how stressors can come from historically racist sources and they can be transferred through generations, right? And so my parents are in their late 70s. And the reality is that some of their experiences and life lessons that they taught me about how I need to show up in the workplace, they gave to me from a loving place, but they were rooted in white supremacy. And I had to acknowledge that. And also why it wasn't working for me, because I also know how they raised me. I also went to an institution where I was surrounded by Black powerful women, been in college, Janetta B. Cole, who signed my diploma. I heard Coretta Scott King speak. These are the women that I was around. And I was like, yeah, these lessons, mama, they don't work for me. This is not right. And so, she was scared. She was fearful. She was like, are they going to let you back? And I was like, I don't know. But I also know that if I do not take a step back, that they're going to eventually let me go because burnout is going to show up, right? And so, the lessons that I learned is that I didn't just speak up for me. I spoke up for my mother and the other women who came before me who could not take breaks. One of my favorite stories that my mother tells is that, she eventually became a teacher, but she grew up cleaning houses, and she remembers asking for a raise from 50 cents to 75 cents. And she was given that raise when they cut her hours. And so when I, have a conversation about being compensated properly for what I am bringing to the organization, I'm doing that not just for me, but for the women who came before me who weren't allowed to do that. And so that's one of the things that I just acknowledge that I personally think I have a responsibility as a Black woman to sometimes speak on and speak for or take the risk so other Black women can know they can. So ironically, a couple of other women in my office are like, you know what, I need a break too, girl. And I'm like, okay, but just make sure, you are advocating for yourself. The other thing that I learned about burnout and when I was away is to allow my coworkers to manage their own boundaries. I think some social media influencer, she said it, but I really had time to sit with it, that sometimes, I know this person likes this and I need to be considerate of this. And sometimes I wasn't getting what I needed as a grant manager because I was not only trying to manage the grant, but then everyone else's boundaries. And when you're managing millions of dollars, sometimes it is what it is. You know what I mean? Things need to happen. And so I'm learning to say what I need and then allow people to either tell me they can't give it to me, or we come to an agreement or we compromise, but I can't do both. And so, also responding to who my coworkers are and not who I think they should be is something that contributed to my burnout. I show up a specific way in the workplace, and that comes from different things. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's not, or, right is subjective. But, I have to acknowledge who they are and what they bring to the table and then move forward and not spend so much time in a space where they ought to, they shouldn't. And all of these are things that I thought through as Meredith, because I show up personally, I've decided that I show up as Black first and then a woman. And so thinking through, how when we start having conversations and when things happen in this country with George Floyd, or when years ago when that young lady was dragged out of her seat at a high school, by a school resource officer. I'm sorry, I can't sit here and talk about pregnancy prevention right now when I feel like my Black and brown children are under attack in different ways. So just making sure that I advocate for myself, I speak up, but allow other people to manage their boundaries. Something else is to stop multitasking. Y'all, it just doesn't work. I have 2 screens up right now. If I could have a third with a spreadsheet up, it would be up. Multitasking, I know, is one of those things that it seems like it's minor, but our brains just aren't equipped to be overstimulated like that. And we're already dealing with outside stressors from race, family, and then to put on our plate 16 different things that need to happen. And I just had to have an honest conversation that if I don't finish this to-do list today, that's not going to prevent a pregnancy. It's not. And, that's just the reality of it. And so it's okay that if something gets done the next day. And then lastly, stress, y'all, is not called the silent killer for nothing. And stress shows up in our bodies in so many different ways. It changes your brain. Chronic stress changes the way your brain functions, because when you are under chronic stress, your brain just wants to survive and just get you through the day. And, I am not going to be foolish and sit here and talk about meditate and read and this and that, because yes, those things work. But if you have children or if you have parents or whatever life brings, sometimes those things just aren't accessible. But I would encourage you to find one thing. If it's music, if it's standing outside in quiet, 5 minutes out of your day, find something that can help bring you down. Even if it's just taking a deep breath before your meetings. One of the things that I found myself doing, and I had to reframe, was I was preparing for my work based on who was in the meetings and not the content of the meeting. And that's a conversation that I had with my supervisor as well, is that I was reacting and I was preparing my performance based on who was in the meeting, because I didn't want someone to be upset. Not, if you haven't noticed, I have a colorful personality. And so it wasn't that I cared, so I was going to be upset. It was more like, that's not going to help this process move along. And so how can we keep everyone happy? How can we keep everyone moving forward? And it really wasn't about the content of the meeting. And I'm a firm believer, if you ask anybody, I get paid by my employer, but I work for the children of South Carolina. And so when I show up to my meetings, that is who I'm showing up for, to make sure rural communities get funding and people aren't left out because they don't look a certain way. And that's another reason I'm happy to be in this space, because a lot of our nonprofits who are led by Black and Brown people were created out of necessity. And so, you know, they don't have a fancy Blackbaud, they don't have QuickBooks, but that doesn't mean they're not worthy of a federal grant or a $500,000 grant, just like another nonprofit. It just means it needs to look a little different. You know what I mean? And so that has nothing to do with what we were talking about. I apologize. But as you see, those are the things that were on my mind. And so I needed to step away. And so, you know, when we look, the other thing I want to point out is that when we also look at some of these stress indicators, historically, those assessments were created on the life experiences of middle-aged white men, middle-class white men. And so also thinking through when we are comparing ourselves and when we are comparing our success or stress levels, look at where those assessments came from and give yourself a little bit of grace and kindness. And it's 2021. I'm all about redefining some of these things and throwing them out and saying, says who, according to who, compared to what. And those are some really bold questions to ask. But I think at the end of the day, even my supervisor is gracious enough to give me days to think. Like, those are days. I love a whiteboard. If I have Wi-Fi and a whiteboard in my head, I can change the world. But I love a whiteboard. And so I can't be in a meeting 5 days a week. When am I supposed to do the work? You know, what does that look like? And so, you know, some of the most successful organizations in this country, in the corporate world, they have this philosophy where if you take care of your employees, they will take care of your customers and the rest will take care of itself. And so I would love for our nonprofits to adopt that. Sometimes we think we have to be in the communities, take care of the community. You hire people to do that. As leaders, we have hired people. Well, let's take care of our folks in-house so they can go out and do a great job. And so as I come to a close, I would just like to encourage everybody to do these 4 things, is to kind of identify, you know, and reframe some of the beliefs about work that have caused stress, especially my young professionals out there. You know, I was a part of that generation when grind music came out, so you needed to grind, and if you wasn't hustling, and if you wasn't, you know, wearing yourself out, you weren't worthy of whatever. So that's a lie. You know, that is something I'm definitely reframing, that if I wasn't struggling, then work wasn't meaningful, especially working in the fields that we work in. And that's not true. We have chosen to work in nonprofit because we care about it, but we still deserve to be taken care of and compensated properly for our time in these nonprofits. Identify your professional boundaries and expectations. My thing is, when I'm off, I'm off. That's just it. That is a very hard thing to do. And I will admit, even during the month of May, I did not take my email off my phone. I didn't. And I should have. But I'm looking at Jessica's face and she is not pleased. But, you know, and I'm working on that. But just like I don't sit during 9 to 5 and talk to my parents all day, or talk to my girlfriend Manya, or do all these things after work, I, you know, also should not be answering emails and all those types of things. And so just thinking through, you know, what do those professional boundaries look like for you? Now, to folks who aren't familiar with boundaries, it's going to feel like resistance and it's going to feel like non-compliance, but you can encourage them to create their own boundaries. And something else that someone taught me was to keep track, to keep a little work journal of when things were going well, when things weren't going well. I personally was able to pick up patterns that gave me an indication that I needed to take a step back. You know, aggressive behavior in meetings, and I know we're kind of, that word aggressive and assertive is kind of touchy right now, but sometimes the meetings just got downright aggressive. It was a lot. And that's just not my personality. That's just not how I show up in the world. And so when I noticed that for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, I'm in this constant state, and then after work, I need to call one of my friends and tell her about this horrible day, or I'm texting Jessica about how to figure something out, a problem solve. that becomes a problem. You know what I mean? Like I need to, as old people used to say, you need to pluck that at the root. And so I needed to figure out what was wrong. And so I encourage people, just if it's a mood tracker, just to figure some things out. And then lastly, you know, my supervisors on the phone, my leaders, my executive directors, please brainstorm additional ways to support your staff that can reduce stress and prevent burnout. But not only brainstorm them, revise your employee handbook and make it part of your culture. Meaning that it's not preferential treatment. Like I said, some of our most successful organizations in the country put their employees first. So even if you cannot compensate someone more or pay them more, because I understand how grants work, but you know, Tuesdays and Fridays you work from home. We have seen it. People can work from home. Or, you know, on these days we have lunch brought in. Find ways, or, you know, there is a day during the week where you can bring your children to the office, or let you flex a Tuesday and work on a Saturday, because the reality is for someone like me who's an informal caregiver, doctor's offices, pharmacists, banks, the VA hospital, the cancer center, all these places are open on Tuesdays. They're not open on Fridays. So if I need to make appointments and I need to support my parents, it doesn't benefit me that you gave me a long weekend. You know what I mean? That it doesn't help me, but I'm not doing anything on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday because nothing is open. And I'm open to working a couple of hours on those days. And so just kind of redefining and being able to reframe how we work, especially our nonprofits who, and I really want to acknowledge this, a lot of our Black and Brown led nonprofits, someone has a full-time job and they're doing this on the side, right? Which means they're unable to get to our traditional professional development opportunities or meetings like this because they're working. And so really trying to call funders, ask questions, encourage people to find alternate ways to get you what you need so your nonprofit can thrive as well. And so I would love to continue the conversation. So I put my contact information here. You can find me on all social media platforms at Carter Talford, or you can shoot me an email at meredith@cartertalford.com. But I hope that my story inspired somebody to just, you know, take a little bit of time for themselves and figure out some ways that you can prevent burnout. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of the symposium.
Well, I'm gonna go off script a bit. I mean, I made the agenda, so I'm gonna go off it. Meredith, I'm gonna need you to unmute in a minute. I'm putting you completely on the spot. I did not ask you about this in advance, so sorry, girl. But I just felt like everything you said was like, I mean, you did preach a whole sermon. Several folks are asking, can we pass the virtual collection plate? But I want to just create a little bit of space in case people have questions, and you all may not. But I did, you know, as you were talking, there were things that, you know, you talked about, even like boundaries, and that for some folks, having professional boundaries feels new, right? Or is new. And so it will feel like it's resistance. It will feel like, particularly for other people when they try to create boundaries, and it may feel like, I'm not really sure if I'm supposed to be doing this and creating this boundary, right? So like, that's something that I think people may have questions about. And the first thing you said about identify your beliefs about work that may cause stress so that they can be reframed, right? Like that's something that I even am going to go back and think about, like, okay, what beliefs, what stories do I believe about work that make me feel like, you know, I have to be working all the time, right? And so I just want to create some space, right? If no one has questions, that's cool, that's fine. I'm gonna keep going to the next thing on the agenda. But I want to just create space in case people do. So if you do have a question, I'm inviting you to just unmute yourself and just start talking, or you can raise your hand, or you can put the question in the chat. Any of those are an option. And I feel like somebody just may have unmuted.
Hello, my name is Bettyclemens. I just unmuted. And like sister, I'm looking a hot mess, but I'm going to show my hot mess. So I'm a farmer also, so I just came from the fields, and so I do want to apologize. I didn't have time to change from the farmer clothes, but thank you so much, Meredith. My mother passed away when she was 42, and I said it was because of stress. And I always tell Black women, because I work with Black women, so this message is for Black men too. We have learned some kind of way to work ourselves to death, and let's stop doing that. We don't know when enough is enough. And I think some of that is passed down, because I did see my mom, again, she just worked so much, and I do my best to have self-care time. I call myself a self-care, exquisite self-care expert. So if anyone on this call ever want to just go for a walk, I do walking meetings, then we can walk. And Meredith, I want to give to you a book that I wrote, and it's called Unstressed, How to Keep Your Stress in Check. And I do want to offer that to you. There are some other strategies, but music and nature, that's why I was there this morning. In February, I'm having a bad time. I just go back to the roots, real roots. I mean, I put my hand in the soil and get sun. Sun wasn't out, so my nails are still very dirty. But yes, so thank you so much, Meredith. And y'all, let's please be mindful that we are not workhorses, and we don't have to work ourselves to death to feel validated. I recall I'm gonna shut up after this, my college roommate, she had to work every waking hour. And we've been out of college over 35 years, and she's still running that way. And it's just gonna be a matter of time before the body says, I can't do it anymore. So let's please be mindful. Self-care is number one. And again, thank you so much, Meredith, for sharing. And again, let's not again compare ourselves to other groups. I tell Black women this too. We can't compare our weight chart to somebody else's weight chart. We have different structures, and as we can see, now everybody else want to be this structure. So do not, let's stop comparing ourselves. Thanks.
I wanted to say something real quick. Thank you very much, Meredith. But a quote that I heard recently that resonates with me, and I'm going on vacation next week, and I was thinking about processing and doing all the emails, but I'm gonna shut it down and I'm gonna spend time with my family. I'm gonna relax. I'm gonna kick my feet up at the beach because of what you said, because you're right. But I said, one of the quotes I had is that the skills that you need and you use as a Black woman to survive are different from the skills and that you need to thrive. So a lot of us spend time in survival mode when we need to take care of ourselves, take care of others around us, but take care of ourselves most importantly in order to really thrive. We want to survive. We don't have to work. We don't have to feel we have to give 100% of ourselves to everyone and 0% back to ourselves. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Carmisha, I see you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Yes. So, hey Meredith, I'm so glad I joined today and you're on here. But my question is, how do you deal with the fear that comes with, asserting your boundaries? And, like you said, you had very bold conversations with your leadership. And how do you navigate that process? Or what if they would have been like, no? What would have been your next steps, and just kind of talk through, like, how do we gain that confidence to be bold in advocating for ourselves?
So, I don't know if it's Judge Hatchett or whoever. One of them was like, I'm that person who likes to wait until her ducks in a row for everything. I have a plan. It's a spreadsheet. But she said, sometimes you just got to pick them up and make a run for it. And I knew that if I did not, the fear of what it was going to look like on the other side, I mean, I'm, and not necessarily proud of it, but I was probably going to cut somebody out at work. I mean, that's just what it was. And I knew that I didn't want that to happen, right? For several reasons. And so it was more out of necessity. It was one of those things, I've never been in a situation, it was like, you just don't have a choice. You know how sometimes you're in situations where you're like, is this? And, I say that jokingly, but I'm so serious where, I could not sit through another meeting of behavior that I thought was unacceptable. It wasn't a good use of my time. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what they were doing, but it wasn't a good use of my time. And so, of course, I'm a woman of faith. And so I had conversations with my friends. I had conversations with people who knew me. And and Jessica's one of them. And when they knew that I was at a point, because I'm always trying to be considerate and intentional and find a solution. But I was at the point where I was like, yeah, I probably should take some time off. They were like, okay, we get it. And so, and it's not easy. And the reality is, like, part of those things that I learned, you know, because my mom was like, you gonna do what? And my dad was like, you know, don't get fired, you know, that kind of fear. But any situation, any relationship where there's a threat of like termination, if you need to take care of yourself, is borderline like abusive. You know what I'm saying? And my thing is, I was prepared to take leave without pay. That's how serious it was. And so it did not come to that, but that's what I was prepared to do. And if that wasn't an option, you know, I was going to step back, regroup. I was going to carry on, but I also was going to be like, do I really want to spend another 10 years of my life and my career at an institution that does not value me and would want me broke, not making sense as long as I was here, versus me being able to show up and to look for grants, write grants, manage grants, think about our future as an organization in an effective way. So it was kind of like, you know, I was like, I got to bet on myself. I bet on everybody else. I show up for everybody else. Let's show up for Meredith today and see what happens. So it worked out.
So we have 2 questions in the chat that that I feel like are important enough to ask that I'm gonna adjust a little bit. Again, I made the agenda, so I can adjust it a little bit. So we'll talk about these 2 questions, and then I'm gonna talk about the breakout rooms, and we can come back after that. So the first question that I think is important from Kiana is, and I'm just gonna read the question, Meredith, so you don't have to. I battle my identity intersectionalities, being a Black queer woman, and feeling like my identities are seen as aggressive or negative from previous experiences. How can I move from seeing my intersectionalities as a battle to seeing them as my strengths?
So I'm not sure I'm equipped to answer this, but I'm gonna answer it as best as possible. You know, I think there's always gonna be something, you know what I mean? And I think you have a conversation with yourself, in an honest conversation, you know, not the ones that's cute that we post on Instagram, but that honest, you know, as Iyanla say, good conversation with yourself, and know if you are showing up, because we can't control other people. You know, I am as bubbly as you can get sometimes, and people are like, but Meredith, you're unapproachable. What? You know what I mean? And so I think sometimes we can't control that. If you know that you're showing up as who you are and your best self. Now, of course, you know, if there are things you want to change, those are on your terms. But if you know that you are showing up and you are bringing your best self to any space and every part of you, that is where you're going to be able to go to sleep at night and find comfort. You will drive yourself bananas trying to please everyone and make everyone uncomfortable. Because what I learned was there are some people who will never be comfortable for Meredith. I am not for everybody, and I acknowledge that. But I know that when people walk away from me, the one thing that I'm proud of is every 100%, even if it's a difficult conversation, I feel like people leave an interaction with me with their integrity, and they know where I stand. Those are the 2 things that you know, you don't have to like me. You know, I apologize if I hurt your feelings, but I don't want you to walk away feeling like I have stripped you or somehow, you know, compromised your integrity or made you or forced you, and that you were very clear about where I stood on the conversation we were having. So thank you for your question. I'm not sure if I was helpful, but you know, find your space and, you know, sit there, girl.
And the other thing, I put something in the chat about having like a squad of people who support you. And the other thing that I was thinking about as you were talking, Meredith, is I do like a regular values exercise. Like at the end of every year, I go through and like look at my personal values. I do it from organization too. And so for me, like, as long as I am living in my values, and that when I reflect on an experience, I can be proud of how I showed up, then I'm okay. Because to Meredith's point, like, we aren't for everybody. Like Meredith, Meredith knows that I'm a lot, you know, like I got a whole lot. Like I move quick because my brain moves fast. Like I just be doing a lot. And I know that I'm not for everybody, and that's okay, right? But as long as I can sleep at night, knowing that I am living in my values and my truth, then that's just going to be okay. Because everybody in for me, right? Like I don't want to be close to everybody, right? And then the last question before we transition is, how do you establish boundaries and be assertive without being perceived as the angry Black woman?
So I have a problem with this whole angry Black woman thing because, okay, so if I can be mad, I can be angry, but this whole, and I get where it comes from, but I think I am consistent. You can ask anybody in my agency. I have a relationship with anybody in my agency. I've had difficult conversations, and I am consistent, and I stick to the facts. I think I started by telling you all, sometimes I am transactional to a fault because I don't want anybody to get confused about what we're doing here, right? And so, and sometimes I can be a little too formal, but formality is my safe space, especially with people who would call me an angry Black woman, right? I keep it to the point. Someone asked me for a meeting earlier today, and I was like, I'm sorry, I need to prepare for this symposium. They were like, oh, you can't squeeze it. I can talk to you at 3:00. I didn't make it a thing. I didn't, and I think it takes work. I'm gonna be honest. I took a communications class because like I said, I am from Chester. So, it takes work. And I think it's okay, for us to, my Blackness is not centered around white supremacy, right? That's personally, I don't respond. I don't show up as a Black woman as a response to how I feel like white people are gonna treat me or how white people are gonna experience me. That's exhausting. I'm not gonna do it. But one of my boundaries at work is I have said I'm not talking about race with non-Black people in the workplace. That is a boundary that I set up. So you kind of just sit with yourself, identify. Jessica taught me this: when something makes you feel off, usually it tapped on one of your personal values, but then that goes back to figuring out what your personal values are. And so I don't know if that answered the question, but definitely email me. We can chat it up. I love to talk to new people, as you all see, but figure out like what are your values, like what centers you, and then everything that is not aligned with that, you'll be able to tell what your personal boundaries are. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I hope that.
The only thing I would add too, because I do a lot of work in this space around like burnout and mm-hmm. talking about all of this sort of things, is like, one, to Meredith's point, like the angry Black woman, like that thing that people have put on us, like that's like based in like whiteness. And for me, I'm like, one, there are times where I'm like, everyone should be angry, right? Like, because of the work that we all do, like we're in this space where we are, working to improve communities, right? And there are situations where everyone should be angry. The fact that I work with freshmen pre-COVID who could not read, every human should be furious about that, right? So there's that one. Sometimes people need to be angry. And two, like for me, and it goes back to what I said earlier, is that because I'm so clear on who I am and why I do what I do, like if someone views me as angry, like that's okay. Because like that's not, for me, like that is not who I am. And so if someone does feel like I'm angry, then that's their problem and that is not mine. And that's for them to sit with and live with and not for me. Like one time I remember when Meredith was my boss and I told her, I think that I had put in to get like PTO because I was going to Disney, which is my happy place. And I think that like maybe she hadn't yet approved it or something. And I was like, well, I'm going to be at Disney. Like I'm going to take that vacation. Even if it's not approved, I just won't get paid. And she was like it took her a minute because I'm a lot. And if I had a different boss besides Meredith, that person might have thought I was angry. And that would have been okay, because I would have still been at Disney on vacation, whether I was getting paid or not, because that's what I needed to do to be my best self. So that's that. Meredith, you have any parting last things before I switch us over?
Just kind of something cute. Ironically, I was asked, and I had to have a difficult conversation about why I wasn't angry. And so that was an interesting conversation, because I was like, so what you're not about to do is pit Black women against each other, because you're uncomfortable with how some of them are showing up and you're comfortable with how some of us are. So, but thank you all. I have any questions, but feel free to contact me on social media, and I, love to connect.
Well, thank you, Meredith. I appreciate you. So for this next portion, we're going to be in breakout rooms, and we sent an email that went out this morning that kind of had an overview of those, but I'll give you the breakout rooms again. And we picked these specific breakout rooms because when we were talking, the committee was talking and planning, we felt like there are times where, particularly for us, right, there are times where we are approaching burnout because the workload is just too much, right? And the typical tricks and tips for beating burnout, which I'll actually give you a few at the end that are like more brain science based, but those sometimes don't work when you just got more to do than any time allows. And so we thought through, what if we talked about beating burnout by talking about some skills and some things that we can all use in our work that can decrease our workload and hopefully decrease our stress, which can decrease the likelihood that we have burnout. So we've got 3 breakout rooms, and you will have the option to be able to pick your breakout room, just so you know. So you will need to be kind of in front of your computer in a second to click which breakout room you want. The first breakout room is narrative leadership and storytelling. And Jamisha Shackerford will lead that particular breakout room. And in that breakout room, she's going to talk to us about, how do we tell the story of the work that we do to donors and to the community. And Jamisha is the program officer at Central Carolina Community Foundation. And so she manages a portfolio of grants. And so she knows kind of what the other side looks like in terms of, looking at grants and saying yes and no. And what we all know is that, the data is so clear that our Black-led nonprofits get less grant money, right? Which is crazy. And because we get less grant money, we can't then hire staff people to help us out. It's very cyclical. And so Jamisha's going to really talk through, here's how we tell the story of what we do in a way that can get us more money, right? I think the system is broken and we need to blow it all up. But until we can blow up the system, this is what we're going to do. We're going to learn how to tell the story in the way that we need to. The second breakout room option is grant writing, and Jermaine Husser is going to lead that particular breakout room session. Jermaine is the VP of Mission Services for the Palmetto Goodwill, and he's also the Executive Director of Palmetto Warrior Connection. And this particular breakout session, we're not going to tell you the ins and outs of how to write a grant so that you can then go write a grant. More than anything, what Jermaine will talk about is, what do you need to know about what goes in a grant, so that as you're running programs, you're able to think through, this is the data that I need to collect, this is the information that I'm going to need, so that when it's time to write a grant, I've got it, and I don't then have to do the extra work of trying to go back and say, well, shoot, how many did, what time did, what happened here? So that's kind of that. It's not going to be the nuts and bolts, but more, what are the ingredients that you need to write an effective grant? And then the last one is about volunteer management with Heather Singleton. And Heather is she is the CEO of Strategic Public Relations Consulting, a consultancy that serves businesses and nonprofits around public relations. And she also has worked with the United Way of the Midlands, where she was managing volunteers. In this session, we're going to talk all about all things volunteers: recruiting, retention, how to effectively use them, how to effectively thank them, all of the things around volunteers, because if we're able to effectively utilize volunteers, then again, we can potentially decrease our workload. So I am in a second going to give you those 3 options of the 3 breakout rooms, and I'm going to assign them by numbers. So I'm going to ask Rodney to type this in the chat, because as Meredith said, multitasking is not real. So breakout room number 1, it will be listed as number 1, is leadership and storytelling. So if you want leadership and storytelling, breakout room number 1. Breakout room number 2 is grant writing. So if you want grant writing, number 2. And then volunteer management will be number 3. So number 3, volunteer management, because that's the easiest way to do it. When you go to the breakout room, there'll be a facilitator from our team, and they will ask you to introduce yourself in the chat, just because it's the most efficient way to make sure we know who everybody is, just like you did before. And maybe, tell us who you are, what you do, and what you want to get out of the session, all in the chat function. And then they'll introduce the speaker, and then the speaker will take it from there. So we will, because I've adjusted the agenda a little bit, but we'll come back at 2:45 so that we have a full good bit of time in those breakout sessions, but I will give you a 10-minute warning and a 5-minute warning. So if y'all have questions, just put them in the chat, and I'm going to go ahead and open up those breakout rooms. And again, all of the numbers of the breakout rooms are in the chat, but you can choose your own breakout room. So I have opened all of the rooms. And so what will happen is that you'll get a little pop-up message that lets you pick, and you just choose 1, 2, or 3. And if you do not, if for some reason you don't see that as an option, you can go down to the very bottom, and those little 3 little periods, like boom, 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 ellipsis is what they're called. If you click that, it'll also give you the breakout room options.